Well, hello everyone. My name is Brendan Ciecko, founder and CEO over here at Cuseum. First off, I want to say thank you to everyone who is joining us today, our attendees, as well as my amazing colleague, Maddie Taylor, who leads content in various research initiatives over here at Cuseum.
Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here today. Thank you, Brendan.
Thank you. And close to 1,000 of you registered today, and I thank you for joining us. To all of our first-time viewers, welcome. And for those of you who have tuned into any of our other webinars, thank you, as always, for being here. And thank you for your continued support and interest. It's always been such a humbling, rewarding, and inspiring feeling to be involved in so many dynamic discussions at the in the cultural sector on a dynamic range of issues and topics. And, it goes without saying, a great deal has changed since this past spring when we last gathered for our virtual, gathering, our webinar. And since then, we've witnessed so many inspiring and hopeful developments. And with vaccines well underway, we've been able to enjoy the long-awaited reopening of the majority of our beloved cultural institutions and much of the country, much of the world. And of course, the cultural industry is facing new challenges, but we are so optimistic about the future. So super excited to be back with a webinar, but it's going to be a little bit different than our typical webinars. Usually our webinars, we have panelists and guests, and it's very interactive. We hope it will remain to be interactive, but we're going to be presenting some recent research that our team has conducted on how museums and cultural organizations of different shapes and sizes are generating revenue through virtual programs. And before we jump into the research, I do want to invite everyone to take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat. It's been a long time since we've convened virtually, so let everybody know who you are, where you're tuning in from. And throughout the webinar today, feel free to chime in through the chat box. We'll also have time for questions. So if any arise, please use the Q&A functionality at the bottom of your Zoom screen to ask and upvote, the little upvote feature, questions in the Q&A. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand the microphone over to my colleague Maddie to introduce this research, which we are so excited to share with you today.
Awesome. Thank you for the intro, Brendan. So to kick us off, as many of you may know, due to these disruptions caused by COVID-19, we have seen a surge in digital initiatives and programs which have sprung up at museums, cultural institutions, really across the world. And since March of 2020, we've witnessed this incredibly rapid acceleration of digital priorities, which has transformed content, strategy, research, infrastructure at cultural institutions really faster than ever before. And so now, more than 1 year, and as I'm looking at the calendar, really almost a year and a half since those initial 2020 lockdowns began, the importance of digital today just remains undisputed.
And in many ways, the pandemic served as a forcing function. It elevated digital strategy, online content, virtual experiences, social media, you name it. These elements all became key pillars of museum engagement. And in the midst of the temporary closures, the capacity limitations, and concerns over public safety that have in many ways characterized the COVID-19 era, these digital avenues have been some of the only ways to engage, educate, and inspire the public. And while many of us are anticipating like a full return of on-site experiences at our cultural institutions, we also expect that digital engagement is here to stay. In hybrid modes, you're going to hear us talk a little bit about hybrid during today's presentation. Hybrid modes of engagement will play an even greater role than ever in the years to come.
Yeah, absolutely, Brendan. And at the same time, traditional revenue channels from ticketing, events, food and beverage sales, on-site gift shop purchases, really anything that happens on site, those have all taken a really significant hit. And as museums work to recover financially, we've seen digital reveal its potential to help recover some of those losses. And so as organizations experiment with just a huge range of exciting virtual programs, they're also exploring a number of ways to monetize those offerings. And so in this pandemic era, cultural institutions have successfully leveraged so many types of digital initiatives to diversify their revenue streams and rebound a little bit after this devastation brought on by COVID-19.
And over here at Cuseum, our team is committed to researching the impact of digital programs and platforms in the cultural institution. We've been, hands deep, heads deep into this since 2014, and now the importance of diversifying revenue streams and revenue streams in general has never been clearer. And we believe that it is vital to examine the possibilities of digital programs as a part of this equation. And so with this in mind, many questions have emerged. How many organizations are monetizing digital programs? What does it look like across the broader community? What types of virtual initiatives are bringing in the most revenue? What is the ROI or return on investment for digital programs across the different types and sizes? And do organizations plan to continue these programs after COVID-19 is under control? And so in an effort to really understand the shift towards digital revenue generation or revenue generation through digital channels, the Cuseum team launched the first ever study of revenue generation through virtual programs in the cultural sector. We started this research back in January of 2021. The study included over 500 survey participants. If you participated, thank you so much for dedicating some time to this. We really value that and are excited to share it. And this examines seven different types of virtual programs, various pricing models, and the impact of such initiatives on revenue generation at different types and sizes of cultural institutions.
Yeah, thank you, Brendan. So as Brendan mentioned, the goal of this study is really to answer some of those questions that he just mentioned, identify trends, commonalities, really across those 7 different types of digital programming we explored, and just examine the potential return on investment of digital programs. So before we jump into this, I do want to add that this data is preliminary, and really the whole idea of monetizing digital programs at all, especially in the cultural sector, is very novel. So with that in mind, we're really excited to share these results, and we hope that they can be a useful kind of jumping off point just to help guide cultural organizations through very uncharted waters. Awesome. So jumping into some methodology here, as Brendan mentioned, this report is based off of a January 2021 study of over 500 cultural professionals. And you can see the breakdown here a little bit, a range of organizations, small, medium, large, various budgets, various annual visitor counts. And so the data represents cultural professionals just across a huge range of organization types. And I also want to add that the distribution of respondents by museum discipline in particular isn't closely in general alignment with the latest 2015 data by the Institute of Museum and Library Services. In addition to that, the respondents represent departments ranging from education to curatorial, marketing, external relations, technology, IT, development, fundraising, membership, really a huge range. So shout out to everyone who participated. We're really happy with the survey pool. And thank you to everyone, who, like Brendan said, who took 10 or 15 minutes to fill out our survey and helped in the final production of this report.
Thanks, Maddie, for setting the table around some of the methodology used. The survey respondents were asked to report on their organization's virtual programs in 6 core strategies, plus 1 special category that we'll get into shortly. So first and foremost, you have your virtual tours. We love them. We've seen them. Everybody is hopefully familiar with some of the great successes in that specific category. We had a lot of fun writing about it and having webinars about virtual tours, and it was great to get down to the numbers and the dollars and cents to understand the inputs and outputs around virtual tours. Virtual summer camps, because sometimes parents need a break and the little ones need to go to summer camp. How does that translate over to a virtual environment? And the same can be said about virtual K through 12 programs. Really great to see so many successful educational programs across the board. And then virtual art classes. And then not specific to art class, but just general classes. You've probably seen cooking classes and yoga classes and other types of connoisseur classes and general events. And then virtual galas, because who doesn't like to get fancy on a Friday evening in the virtual realm? That was kind of a new type of fundraising mechanism that was built out of necessity. So we're glad to have some data there. And who can forget those animal cameos and virtual animal encounters that we saw so many zoos and aquariums innovating during the early days of the pandemic. Those are just a couple of the
Awesome.
core categories.
Thanks, Brendan. And so for each of those 7 categories that Brendan just mentioned, we asked our respondents to answer 4 kind of big overarching questions to help us gather this data. So first of all, does your organization offer this type of virtual program? Second, what is the mode of payment for this virtual programming? So there were a few different options there, from fixed fees to pay what you wish pricing models, including the virtual programs and the price of membership. So we will get into that in a couple of slides, but really important question there. Then number 3, how many people attend on average per program? So super important question there, measuring attendance. And then how many staff hours are invested in the programming? Is it high reward, low lift, or is it the opposite? So really important questions here around just gathering all this data. How much time does it take? What does it cost? And all of that.
Thank you, Maddie. And before getting into these more granular questions, we begin this survey by trying to understand the following big question. How many cultural organizations are even offering digital programs? And of the 500 plus museum and cultural professionals surveyed, we found that approximately 92% said that their institution offers some kind of digital program. Hats off to everybody who kind of on the seat of their pants were able to get these programs up and running. And I'm sure that that number continues to grow. And what accounts for the soaring popularity of digital programs? Well, as we all know, back in spring of 2020, when the first wave of COVID lockdown swept through the world and the United States, virtual programs initially emerged kind of as a stopgap solution to what seemed like they were temporary closures, and we all know they were not temporary. And as institutions prepared for weeks or months or quarters of lockdowns, we witnessed the arrival of new social media initiatives and online activities, in a lot of ways powered by this great hashtag museum from home.
Yeah, absolutely. So then soon after that kind of first wave of online activity, so those first weeks of the pandemic lockdown in March of 2020, we saw 2 distinct phenomena emerge, really changing the course of virtual engagement. So first of all, it quickly became apparent that the COVID-19 pandemic would have far more wide-spanning effects than the initially projected 2-week lockdown. It's kind of wild to think a year and a half ago we thought we were only going to be home for 2 weeks. And as extended closures and on-site restrictions became the new normal, museum professionals began to recognize virtual engagement not just kind of as this stopgap or short-lived improvisation, but as a more long-term requirement to stay relevant. And as a result of that, digital considerations quickly became an important strategic focus for cultural organizations of all types. And then secondly, institutions really began to see this kind of unprecedented success of digital programs. And that was beyond the scope of their original purpose to kind of keep audiences engaged for just a couple of weeks. So apart from keeping audiences kind of inspired and interested during those short-term lockdowns or initially projected short-term lockdowns, many museums began to see virtual programs as a way to reach new audiences, to make offerings more accessible, and even to experiment with new, novel modes of engagement. I love so many of the experiments and innovations that we've seen in the past year and a half. So we've even seen organizations been able to reach new kind of international audiences, cultivate kind of wide-spanning, vibrant audiences outside of their local areas as a result of all of these digital programs.
Thanks, Maddie. And right here, you can take a look at how popular different types of virtual programs were across cultural organizations. As you can see, virtual K through 12 programs and virtual classes and events are coming in on top. You know, again, hats off to education departments across the globe who kind of stepped up to the plate and produced some of the most incredible programs as quickly as you did and as continuous as you did. So it was no surprise to see so many great K through 12 and classes and events take off. And due to the enormous success of digital, many museum leaders are envisioning what we've been calling a hybrid future, where virtual modes of engagement will remain an enduring part of programming alongside more traditional in-person offerings. And moving forward, it's likely that things like audience feedback, general participation numbers and engagement rates, community impact, and return on investment will influence how organizations prioritize virtual programs and what types of initiatives they choose to develop.
Yeah, absolutely, Brendan. And I think this really invites kind of the next big question, which is, are cultural organizations monetizing and generating revenue from digital programs? And if so, how? So we're happy to report that overwhelmingly the answer is yes. Organizations are monetizing digital programs in some capacity. Of the approximately 92% of respondents who noted that their organization is offering virtual programs, 73% are also charging for them in some way. And so as you can see here, the mode of payment used by institutions does vary. Here you can see that over 57% of monetized virtual programs charged a fixed fee, and that's aggregated across all of the digital programs. But institutions also use other payment methods, which I think I did mention. So pay what you wish pricing, or including virtual programs in the price of membership. So there are a few different payment models that we did see.
Thanks, Maddie. And at this time, you know, it's unlikely that many cultural organizations have offset their COVID-19 losses, if such a thing is even possible, you know, especially through digital revenue streams. And the majority of cultural organizations, about 57%, expect to generate, you know, $10,000 or less from virtual programs in 2021. And that being said, early trends can play a critical role in helping organizations assess the potential returns on investment of various digital programs and determine how to create value in some digital form. And as you can also see, 25% of surveyed organizations, which is a pretty significant minority, expect to generate over $25,000 from virtual programs this year, and about 8% anticipate over $100,000 in revenue, which is no small feat.
And as we talked about a lot, Brendan, we've also witnessed this incredible rise of virtual memberships. So while the return on investment calculations in this particular report are based on programs that charged a fixed fee, virtual membership is absolutely worth special consideration. So in addition to charging separate fees for virtual programs, many cultural organizations have chosen specifically to incentivize membership with a range of digital offerings, from virtual member events, special online content, virtual appreciation, and even fully fledged virtual membership levels. And I do want to add, because this is such a big topic, Cuseum actually produced a separate report specifically focusing on digital priorities and virtual membership kind of levels and virtual modes of membership. And I think my colleague will be dropping that in the chat. I'll also kind of drop it in the chat, a link to download that separate report after we finish this presentation. But if you're interested in learning more about that, there's some really valuable information there. So just from this, you can see that approximately 43% of the surveyed cultural organizations are either already offering or considering offering a virtual membership or virtual membership benefits in the future. So it's very likely that these virtual modes of membership will play a really important role in scaling virtual programs and making them financially sustainable.
Thanks, Maddie. That's so interesting, and really looking forward to having that other data out there. I can't remember, did we do a webinar on the virtual membership? If
We
we
didn't
did,
do a webinar on the virtual membership. We've definitely covered it a number of times, and we've presented the research at a couple of conferences. So
maybe
there's
it's
a
about
lot of
time.
out there. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. I know it's a continuous conversation, and it's so important to assign value to these extra bits of content, which are so valuable, and it makes them that much more valuable in terms of their perceived benefit and value, but also, we're talking about dollars and cents in the bottom line here. So great, great that there's been such a lively conversation about that. And so this all brings us to another big question. Are digital revenue streams a priority for the future? And although in-person offerings have become mostly possible again, the data suggests that digital is here to stay. Nearly half of surveyed museum professionals agreed that revenue generation through virtual programs was a pressing concern for 2021 and beyond at their organization, with another 31% saying maybe and unsure, which is interesting. I think that there is an opportunity for greater visibility into the the strategic plan of the organization and how revenue generation plays a role in that. And I think that that would likely, if I had to make an assumption, shift that 31% into a yes, but we left it as maybe unsure because there were participants in the survey that just did not necessarily know where it stood from an institutional priority perspective.
Awesome. Yeah, that's absolutely true, Brendan. So I think we're now going to jump into zooming in on some of these particular virtual programs, and we're going to kick this off with virtual tours. So starting with this, virtual tours were really some of the earliest virtual programs that we saw at museums, cultural institutions, one of the kind of first popular modes of online engagement to emerge in those early weeks of the pandemic back in March and April of 2020. And I think that was partially because a lot of museums did have these types of experiences in place in some capacity prior to lockdown.
And today, organizations may offer both pre-recorded and live-streamed virtual tours. For example, the Guggenheim over in New York, the Jewish Museum, a couple blocks down in New York City, the Carnegie Museum of Art over in Pittsburgh, the 9/11 Memorial Museum in New York, Harvard Art Museum in our backyard of beautiful Cambridge, Massachusetts, and the Nelson Atkins are just a handful of organizations offering virtual tours. Interest in virtual tours also spiked during the pandemic. In fact, daily views of videos with the phrase museum tour in the title increased by a whopping 60% as of August 2020, which suggested a heightened consumer demand for this type of virtual content.
Yeah, absolutely. And so in this study, overall, we saw that more than half of respondents noted that their organization offers virtual tours. So it was about 54% total. And kind of unsurprisingly, art museums were the type of organization most likely to offer virtual tours at nearly 3/4 or 74%. And these virtual tours have really proven to be an enormously effective way to reach audiences. Some organizations have cited heightened engagement even through the pandemic. And so some really exciting numbers there. And then overall, virtual tours also require minimal staff time. So 69% of the virtual tours require 10 hours or less. And it's also kind of exciting that pre-recorded tours have the potential to serve as a passive stream of income for these types of organizations.
Thanks, Maddie. But there's also a large disparity in which types of organizations offer virtual tours. So we want to point out that 74% of art museums do, but only 10% of children's museums, 36% of science centers and natural history museums, and approximately half of history museums and landmarks, parks, gardens, and nature centers, and zoos and aquariums offer this.
Yeah, and Brendan, it's also really interesting to note that on average, art museums brought in as much as 3 times more revenue per virtual tour than all other types of cultural organizations. So some really interesting differentiations there between kind of different types of museums, particularly with virtual tours.
Awesome, awesome. And now we're gonna, get out our s'mores and our lemonade. We're gonna talk about the virtual summer camps, which were another category of virtual programming we examined in summer of 2020. Obviously a very unique summer at that. With many organizations still closed or facing restrictions, museums of all kinds launched virtual versions of these popular summer programs.
Yeah, so overall, we saw that Nearly one-third, or 32% of respondents, noted that their organization offers virtual summer camps. And actually, overwhelmingly, zoos and aquariums were the types of organizations most likely to offer virtual camps. And that was followed by science centers and natural history museums. So, again, some really interesting kind of differentiation by museum type or cultural type of cultural institution. In terms of pricing, virtual summer camps do tend to bring in significantly less revenue than the average in-person day camp. So, for example, the average weekly rate for in-person day camp in the United States ranges from $199 to $800, whereas 90% of the virtual summer camps cost $200 or less per session.
Thanks, Maddie. And our data also suggests that virtual summer camps have a very high potential value. But really, let's hold off there for a second, because that being said, again, you don't get the s'mores, but let's put that out. I don't even know if virtual summer camps have, if regular summer camps at museums have s'mores. So let's push that to the side and push the potential high value to the side. So that all being said, they also require a lot of staff time. So the majority, 58% of respondents reported that these require over 15 hours per session. And beyond that, there are many obvious questions about how popular a virtual summer camp might be when traditional in-person summer camps are once available again. And so this is one type of virtual offering that is likely to function better in the physical realm, since it is a form of childcare. And again, there are s'mores. I'll stop right there. And as a result, virtual summer camps may not be future-proof. With these uncertainties and the greater investment of time required, we would recommend conducting a little bit of a market study or investing, a bit in sales and marketing to kind of heat test if these, programs, could be of value moving forward. But we're not quite sure, and we know that the next, 6 to 12 months, and maybe even now, will be very, very telling as to if virtual summer camps will be a thing in the museum sector.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, I think I have seen a couple of examples of hybrid summer camps, but time will tell for specifically kind of fully virtual summer camps. Awesome. Thank you, Brendan. So moving on to something pretty similar, but also different, virtual K through 12 programs. And these have been incredibly popular. So since the start of the pandemic, schools kind of across the country have been operating in virtual or hybrid formats. And as a result, museums and cultural institutions have been creating virtual programming and educational resources and content that will support schools, teachers, students, parents, really everyone in that kind of those educational communities throughout this pandemic. And so we actually did a webinar on this exact topic about a year ago, so in August 2020, if that's something you're interested in. But some great examples there. We've seen the International Spy Museum, Denver Museum of Nature and Science, Detroit Historical Society, Whitney Museum, Pennsylvania Academy of the Arts, excuse me. Those are just some of the organizations that are offering some really exciting K through 12 programs like virtual field trips, resources, and more stuff in that vein.
Thanks, Maddie. And overall, over 2/3 of respondents noted that their organization does offer virtual K through 12 programs, and they were most common at zoos and aquariums, children's museums, and science centers and natural history museums. The data also shows that virtual K through 12 programs demand minimal staff time. So 63% require less than 10 hours per program. And they also serve as a consistent revenue stream.
Yeah, and what I think is really important to point out here is that virtual K through 12 programs are one of those kind of modes of digital programming that are tried and true for the long term. Well before this pandemic, institutions like the Denver Museum of Nature and Science and the International Spy Museum have been successfully monetizing virtual K through 12 programs, lessons, activities, field trips. And the International Spy Museum, who we actually had on that webinar about a year ago, who I just mentioned that, they have been doing this for almost a decade. And so with that in mind, virtual K through 12 programs are really likely to outlive the pandemic and are definitely worth considering as a more long-term option and longer-term revenue stream.
Thanks, Maddie. That's fascinating. And in this study, we also zoomed no pun intended, or maybe pun intended, I don't know, zoomed in on virtual art classes. Pre-COVID, many cultural organizations beyond just art museums, which was interesting to see, offered a variety of art classes in person. And throughout the pandemic, organizations have begun offering these in a virtual format. So for example, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Cleveland Museum of Art, the Denver Art Museum, the Montclair Art Museum, and Toledo Museum of Art are just a few examples of organizations that have launched such online art classes.
Yeah, and so overall, we saw that nearly 1/3 of respondents, so 30%, noted that their organization offers virtual classes. And actually, interestingly, it was parks, gardens, and nature centers, followed by art museums and children's museums that were most likely to offer virtual art classes.
Thanks. And that in its own right is so interesting, because you can imagine an art class at a park or botanical garden and how lovely it is to be outside with an easel, and then how that translates and is still appealing to the masses who are just craving something new and you know, want to get fancy with their brush. But like K through 12 programs, virtual art classes require minimal staff time. So about 64% take 10 hours or less per class. And additionally, virtual art classes are hands-on in nature, even when conducted virtually. So this means they have the capacity to combat what we've all known so well, this screen fatigue, and overcome some of the recent engagement challenges associated with, you know, strictly digital events. So like virtual tours, these may also benefit from being pre-recorded to minimize the demands on staff and provide long-term value as a passive stream of income.
Brendan, I think you just had your second pun, hands-on in nature at the parks and the gardens.
Oh, I didn't even catch that.
Yeah.
Let's get it. Let's try to get 5 puns out of this webinar.
There's going to be a poll. How many puns throughout the webinar did we throw in there? That's a joke, by the way. Awesome. So moving on to some virtual classes and events. So beyond just art classes, many cultural organizations have chosen to create other virtual classes and events. Many of these have been multi-sensory remote experiences, again, kind of combating the Zoom fatigue, screen fatigue that we've all really felt. So a lot of the times they will be connecting an online lecture or lesson with a tangible experience. We have seen virtual cooking classes, virtual yoga classes, and stuff like that really become popular and well received by constituents, by the folks who do attend those types of classes.
Thanks, Maddie. And there were several anecdotes that we came across and headlines and conversations that we came across that suggest that virtual classes and events have the potential to generate enormous sums of revenue. And so over at the Barnes Foundation down in beautiful Philadelphia, as of February 2021, there was a quote from Will Carey over there. I think he's been speaking on this at some of the conferences, so keep your eyes open. That the live online classes proved incredibly popular and have raised more than $600,000 since their launch last March, which is more than double the revenue that in-person classes generated in 2019. And that's kind of like a mind-blowing you know, stat and a mind-blowing number to think that the live online classes would be, you know, double that of the in-person. So was really excited and intrigued by that and hoping to see more of that into the upcoming years.
Yeah, that really is an astonishing number. So shout out to the Barnes Foundation. I'm sure they have some awesome folks over there. So these virtual classes and events overall across all types of institutions, they've been really popular. Over 2/3 or 69% of the surveyed organizations are offering these programs. Parks, gardens, and nature centers, once again, were the organizations most likely to offer them, and that was followed by children's museums, history museums, science centers, and natural history museums.
And the majority of virtual classes and events had strong attendance, with 58% reporting 25 or more participants. They also require a fair amount of staff time, so almost half took more than 10 hours per class. And like art classes, virtual events are likely to have long-term appeal, since activities like cooking and yoga are very hands-on, again, despite being virtual.
Yeah, and beyond that, Brendan, I think it's so interesting that innovative companies, Masterclass, Coursera, these companies have been offering virtual classes for quite a while. Masterclass has been offering virtual classes since 2015 and even saw subscriptions rise tenfold during parts of the pandemic. So, with this kind of explosive growth, I think that really suggests that consumers are becoming accustomed to the notion of paying for virtual classes. The Barnes Foundation example illustrates that too. And it just indicates that this could be a very promising business model going into the future.
Absolutely. Again, kind of keeping your eyes on Masterclass and Duolingo and edX and all of these online learning platforms, it's become very clear that there is a sustainable business model, that there is appetite from your average consumer or lifelong learner, and even the fact people identify now as lifelong learners who are hungry for different types of content. So when I look at Masterclass and I see that someone can pay a subscription to take a class with Jeff Koons, for instance, if they want to be an artist, I see so much opportunity for an art museum, to host a local artist or the artist that they have in residence, or an artist from one of their educators on staff, and to offer that up as an ongoing program, or a zoo and a zoo or aquarium or a garden to offer some sort of class that clearly there's interest in. I think there's a lot to be explored there, and I hope to see some interesting success stories in the upcoming weeks, months, and years around that idea. So you have a
Yeah,
great opportunity, before you.
absolutely. Right. You want to talk a little bit about virtual galas, Brendan?
Yeah. I mean, I popped on a blazer, fancied myself up as if I was going to a virtual gala. Even though I think people probably stay in their pajamas for these virtual galas, I really have no idea. Except I have seen that folks like Whoopi Goldberg have been special guests, and Alicia Keys have been special guests. So it seems like it's opened up a completely new appeal factor given the remote nature. But getting on to the nitty gritty of virtual galas, this has been particularly interesting. As you likely know, the pandemic has caused museums and nonprofits to cancel or postpone their big fundraising events and galas, which are often responsible for raising thousands or even millions of dollars in revenue. And in response, some museums planned virtual galas instead. So the Institute of Contemporary Art in Boston, the Children's Museum down in Houston, the Newport Art Museum in Rhode Island, the San Diego Children's Discovery Museum, and Zoo New England are just a few organizations that have held galas online.
Yeah, absolutely. And with virtual gala tickets, or at least some of them going for hundreds or thousands of dollars, and many of these virtual galas also including silent auctions and sponsorship opportunities, these types of events have already raised significant funds for many organizations. One example is the Museum of Art and Design. Their virtual gala in October of 2020 met its reduced funding goal of $800,000, whereas a typical funding goal for an in-person event would be closer to $1.5 million.
And at surveyed organizations, throwing a virtual gala was only a moderately popular mode of engagement, with 1/4 of respondents reporting that their institution had thrown a virtual gala. They were most popular at art museums, followed by zoos and aquariums. And even small museums with staff of 25 or less averaged about $15,000 of revenue from virtual galas, and larger museums, so staff of 100 to 500, yielded on average as much as $120,000 of revenue from these virtual galas.
Yeah. So while these virtual galas, they do absolutely require significant staff time, a lot of planning. I think it's also definitely worth noting that traditional galas require even more resources many of the time. So space rentals, caterers, printed invitation, and that's all in addition to the extensive staff time. And so, given the strong return on investment for virtual events of this nature, museums may be considering kind of the value of virtual fundraisers beyond this pandemic era, um, as well as engage in kind of a more serious reckoning about the future of glitzy, glamorous in person events. That being said, many institutions had already secured their sponsorship opportunities, sold tickets, already been kind of in conversations with their donors and attendees. And that was before kind of everything shut down in the spring of 2020. So, and that was prior to their virtual reimagining. So the question stands at this point, will major donors continue to participate in virtual galas even after in-person opportunities resume? And unfortunately, we don't have all the answers here, but it's really a major consideration as museums plan for their future philanthropic events.
Thanks, Maddie. And even in the chat, if you think that virtual galas are here to stay or we're a passing moment, just write yes or no in the chat. I'd be very curious at the end of this to see, where we are from the, from the point of view of the sector. Interesting. Thank you. Hybrid galas. There we go with the H word, hybrid. Yes and no. So let's see. This is fascinating. And maybe we'll post back what people responded with about virtual galas.
I'm
So,
waiting with interest because my
yeah.
is open. But
By the way, by the way, I'm already dressed for it. So just invite me. If you're going to have a virtual gala, send us an invite. We'd love to check it out. And you don't need to invite me. I'm just kidding. But anyways, last but not least, we also examined animal cameos and virtual animal encounters, specifically among our friends at zoos and aquariums who participated in this study. For these organizations, featuring animals on virtual channels has proven to be an enormous success throughout the pandemic. The Elmwood Park Zoo was one of the first organizations to pioneer this in April 2020. We had them on a webinar to talk about digital revenue streams, and we were surprised to have our first, I guess, non-human guest. We had a giraffe kind of pop in for a moment. I swear to you that it wasn't planned, and I will never forget it. It was a lot of fun.
No one believes us, Brendan, but it wasn't planned.
Yeah. And another trivia, what color is a giraffe's tongue? Feel free to pop that in the chat. Now I'm just having fun. Organizations like the Phoenix Zoo, Dallas Zoo, Houston Zoo, and the Greater Cleveland Aquarium have also created these virtual live encounters. They're a lot of fun. Check them out. I don't know how that translates over to museums and other types of cultural organizations, but it is a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. We still sometimes look back at our giraffe encounter from, I think, April or May of 2020, whenever we did that webinar. And shout out to the Elmwood Park Zoo for that very special moment. Awesome. So looking at some of the data for virtual animal cameos, these are enormously popular and enormously successful. Of the 23 or so institutions we had represented in our survey data, the vast majority, almost all of them, 91%, indicated that they were offering virtual animal cameos, and the vast majority also charged a fixed fee for those. So for zoos and aquariums, there is very little doubt that these types of virtual animal encounters are a very sound investment. Overwhelmingly, the majority require 10 hours or less of staff time to prepare, and institutions can easily charge over $100 for a single encounter. Most of these encounters last 15 minutes or less, by the way. So at the Phoenix Zoo or Dallas Zoo, they've leveraged the platform Cameo, another really interesting platform, and the encounters last, I think, 5 minutes or less, often just a minute. And so this means that organizations can be earning as much as $25 a minute through these cameos. So definitely a sound return on investment.
Excellent. And with a platform like Cameo, for those who haven't heard of it or who it's new to, this is a platform where, let's say you have a teenage nephew and you want Tony Hawk to wish them a happy birthday. That's something that's possible. And so zoos and aquariums are taking advantage where you could have a zookeeper and a sloth wish your teenager happy birthday or whatever have you. I'm sure there's a lot of different examples, but just it removes the friction, has a built-in audience. It's just another interesting way that zoos and aquariums leverage some of these different platforms. So really inspired by that movement, if you will. And so now jumping into some final numbers and conclusions, and we're going to get into how to download the survey if you haven't already. It's kind of funny to talk about data. It's not the most exciting thing in the world, but maybe we've made it exciting for you today. So with the survey, we were able to show the highest return on investment by program type, the average return on investment by program type, the median return on investment by by program type. So you have the ability to kind of break out the different bits of data, so that you can find something that makes sense for your organization. We realize that it's not a one size fits all. It's really to represent a broad spread of organization and organizational size and region and so on and so forth. So we hope that at least gives you some guidelines as you explore and discuss and ponder what virtual digital revenue streams look like at your organization. And so to finish this off, it's important to note that halfway through 2021, most cultural organizations are now reopened to the public, thank goodness. And in-person programs and events are or will soon be possible again. And so yet, even as organizations move through the phases of reopening, many are planning to continue virtual events, both to engage audiences and recover lost revenue from the pandemic. And many museums and cultural organizations will be trying to balance the return to traditional on-site engagement while continuing to produce relevant virtual content. And we can anticipate that the future of engagement will be hybrid. There we go again. That is having both physical and digital aspects. And so what was once a secondary channel or a back burner channel of interacting with audiences is likely to remain as a critical part of their engagement strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. And so as museums consider, which virtual programs have the potential to become long-term fixtures of their offerings, as well as serve as revenue streams beyond this pandemic era, there are kind of three big considerations. Brendan, how about you start us off?
All right. First and foremost, we have return on investment. So how much revenue can be generated from the program and how many resources are required? Would it be possible to develop a standardized tour, a class curriculum, or even a format that you can easily replicate, allowing you to limit the staff resources for future programs? And can programs be pre-recorded and monetized to serve as a passive stream of income? And also, Maddie mentioned this in the beginning, which programs are the lowest lift with the highest reward? One of my favorite quotes is, how do I give you 90% of the benefit with 10% of the effort? And so keep things like that in mind as you look at the return on investment.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so important. And then second, unique value. Does the virtual program offer unique value? Is it different from, is it something distinct and special, separate from what could just be offered in person? So will audiences continue to participate virtually when in person is an option? So I think Brendan mentioned this earlier on, but for programs like virtual summer camps, which are likely to function better in person due to the fact that they are a form of childcare, this is a really important consideration.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you, Maddie. And so now, we've talked about return on investment. We've talked about unique value or unique value proposition. The third and last consideration, if we were to kind of summarize them like that, would be in the same vein, does this virtual program have value beyond the pandemic? Is it evergreen? A handful of cultural organizations have managed to scale virtual programs like K through 12 classes and field trips and have been offering them on virtual programs for years. So what pandemic era, if we want to call it that, virtual offerings have this potential to be evergreen and produce value for you kind of in perpetuity? And so while digital programs are not yet delivering large, incredible amounts of revenue for the majority of institutions, it's early days, it's early innings. They have the potential to be scaled. And overall, our findings in this study are that most of the programs researched here do not require large amounts of time and resources to be implemented. So you have the ability to be a little bit more agile as you approach virtual programs that can generate revenue. And they suggest that they hold enormous promise for future monetization. So again, early innings, we'll get there, it will continue to evolve. And I think conversations like this and research like this will kind of open a lot of doors as institutions of different shapes and sizes explore this very question. So Maddie, how does someone download this report if they want to download and read the report?
That's a great question. So if you head to cuseum.com/revgen and input your email, you can download and read the entire report for free. I know that if you are a science museum or art museum or large natural history museum or small garden, it can be nice to kind of go through resources like this and kind of see what fits your particular situation, what your peers are doing, what results they've seen. So you can definitely take a closer look at this data if that's something that interests you.
Great. And if you have any questions that arise as you're reading through it, let us know if there are any questions that you feel that it didn't cover, or if there is a eighth category of virtual program that we just haven't, taken into consideration. Let us know. I know that there are a lot of things kind of on the periphery. There are things like NFTs or non-fungible tokens. There are all these new kind of digital ways of producing revenue that museums and cultural organizations are exploring. They were too new. They weren't established enough for us to really dig into them. So maybe, this time next year, we'll think about things like virtual festivals, which I just saw pop up in the chat, and other elements as they start to gain critical mass and at least some data points of if they're successful or not. So again, we hope you enjoy the report. Feel free to send us an email or give us a shout if you think that there's anything that we missed, or if there's anything that you'd like us to take a deeper look at. So there you have it. From our side, now is the time for museums and cultural organizations to consider how their digital content and other unique offerings can keep them connected to audiences while also contributing to the bottom line. And thank you all for joining us today. Thank you so much, Maddie. You are an awesome, awesome co-pilot and leader in all of this. Maddie, for those of you who don't know, has been a huge driving force behind all of the Cuseum webinars and research and content. So really grateful for everything that you do, Maddie, and so happy to have you by my side halfway across the United States in this virtual webinar today.
Thank you, Brendan, and thank you for joining us, everyone. So I'm going to hop out of screen share here. And before we jump into some questions, we do have a few minutes for questions, kind of in anticipation of some of the questions and queries we might be getting. I'm going to throw out the H word again here too. I wanted to let you all know that we are kind of talking about these questions around hybrid events, hybrid future. We are planning a webinar to discuss the kind of the continued relevance of digital revenue streams, hybrid programs, hybrid future. So do stay tuned for that announcement. It's definitely kind of gotten wheels turning in our heads too, and we're excited to push out some content related to that.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you for that. And again, thank you everybody for joining us today. Now let's jump into some live Q&A. Feel free to post your questions in the Q&A box. We will also try our best to check out the chat and see what types of questions arise. Maddie, do you want to take a look at anything that's flowed in?
Yeah, I'm looking at the chat right now. Just to start out, I do want to say this recording will be available. So and the report is also available. So we will be sending this out. If you registered, you'll be getting a copy of the report. And so, yeah, don't feel like you have to kind of scribble down notes or anything or hopefully you haven't been scribbling down notes, because this will be available.
Thank you. Well, anonymous attendee asked, where do panels fit into the event type? So I think we considered those virtual classes and events. We know that there are panels and discussions and presentations. So I think that is where those types of events live. And then we have a question from Deborah. Are there some best practices available for developing hybrid events? We were just ramping up with great virtual programs now. Hybrid, what are some best practices?
Good question. So this is not something we have yet covered, but I think that it's really important. So from some of the webinars that I've attended, something that's going to be really important is not just simply setting up your video camera to live stream whatever event is going to be happening at the museum. So hybrid event just doesn't mean, okay, we have our engaged audiences and it's being live streamed. I think the most successful hybrid events have an engaging component for the virtual audience, and they really think through, how do we engage in person and how do we engage our virtual visitors, rather than just kind of putting in-person event online, if that makes sense.
And Maddie, from what you've seen, are these tactile? Like, is there something tactile to the folks that are at home tuning in to be able to participate? Is there something based around time? Is there something based around food and drink and things like that that you're seeing?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, and I think as we both mentioned, a lot of the most successful kind of virtual events overall have that kind of tangible component. So, part of the reason I think why yoga classes and cooking classes and drawing classes and painting classes were so successful was because it wasn't just kind of tuning in from your Zoom screen, it was tuning into your Zoom screen and having something to connect you to that experience. So,
Hmm.
um, that's going to be super important, I think, for hybrid events, just like we saw for exclusively virtual events.
Hmm. We have a question from Brooke. I feel like I read in spring of 2020 that virtual tours spiked and then fell in a big way. This may have come from Colleen Dillenschneider. So I guess I was surprised to see virtual tours were still sustaining at such a high return on investment engagement. So you might be referring to Museum Hack, that put out a report where they leveraged one key data point, which was Google search volume, which I would argue is highly misleading around that. So you think about Google search volume as an indication of consumer interest in an item literally means that someone is going to Google or one of the partner sites and typing in museum tour. So if you were looking for a museum tour, chances are you would only do that once, and then you would enter the realm of a museum or network of museums where you likely wouldn't search that. Moreover, you wouldn't be searching that at all if it was being served to you from a museum. So therefore, relying solely on something like Google search volume as an indicator in this case is highly misleading. And the same goes with, like, if you were to correlate, and I might be getting a little nerdy here, the popularity jumps in platforms like Amazon Prime and Hulu and Netflix, the traffic's growing like crazy. Google search volume is actually kind of jumping up and down or declining throughout those same periods. So it's actually whether or not there was a spike and a decline or what have you. I think that the underlying data was pretty misleading. We just haven't had time to really, and things went by so quickly we weren't gonna spend much time there. But it's an interesting point that you bring up there, Brooke. And if anybody does have time, I'm happy to share what I think some other resources might be to to help provide clarity more than anything else in that vein. Maddie, microphone's back in your court.
Awesome. Well, I'm seeing some great examples, folks mentioning virtual events they've seen or done in the chat. I do want to say we're really interested to hear more about what you're doing. So if you are doing something interested in kind of hybrid events, hosting hybrid events, if you've had a success or a flop, or this is something you're thinking about, feel free to shoot me an email. I will put my email address in the chat because I would be really interested to hear from all of you about what types of virtual events you have been up to and how they've been going and how you've been approaching them. This report, like much of our content, is not possible without an amazing audience of all of you. So we would be really excited to hear more about that.
Thank
And
you.
Brendan, I also see this question. This is interesting. Where was it? Something else just popped. So someone asked a question. Okay, it was Tracy who asked a question about online classes supported by kits that people can use versus just, I guess, like a typical online event. So we didn't kind of distinguish between those in this particular report. But I do think having kind of a physical component, like I mentioned, can be super helpful. It was actually on one of our membership focused webinars, and I believe it was Megan McCauley who mentioned that there's this important distinction between remote engagement versus kind of strictly virtual engagement. And remote engagement, a really important part of that can be kind of hands-on activities, take-home kits, that kind of thing. And like I said, having something to connect your audiences to the Zoom screen, anecdotally, we've seen that work really well. So that's absolutely something we'd be interested to kind of see more data on or collect more data on, but kind of anecdotally, it is something that we've seen a lot of success with.
Thank you. And these are so many great questions. We wish we had more time to tune in, and we hope to continue this research and continue to investigate whatever we can to ensure and increase the, the probability of success across the board for everybody who's, throwing their hat in the ring or trying to build new types of virtual experiences at their museum or cultural organization, as well as generate new revenue streams. So feel free to give us a shout if you're working on something. We're always looking to highlight new and interesting instances and examples of virtual programming and virtual engagement. And we're ultimately a mirror of the community. So our data, our research, our work is only as great as those we surround ourselves with. And we're surrounded by some amazing people like you at home and you at home today who have tuned in. So thank you as always for being a part of this. And until next time, be well, take care of each other. And
thank you for joining us today.
thanks, everyone. Have a great week. Bye.